snow had a way of hiding the scars of Winterfell. From the high ramparts, the new drifts looked like clean linen thrown over a ruin, smoothing the cracked stones where fire had danced, softening the splinters of old siege ladders left to weather, rounding the edges of the courtyard where pikes had lodged and men had bled. Jon stood there in the pale morning, gloved hands on a crust of hoarfrost, and listened. The castle made its winter noises. A chain clinked where a stable hand worked. A smith's hammer beat the air into crisp pieces. A raven fussed in its wicker cage as if scolding the cold. Beneath that lay the hush of snow. Vast, steady, indifferent, falling through the pines, filling the godswood's black pool till it lipped at carved roots and reddened leaves. Ghost was almost invisible below him, a pale shadow moving along the inner wall, leaving prints that filled in as he watched. The old dire wolf lifted his head once and loosed a breath that steamed briefly and vanished. "You should wear a cloak," Davos Seaworth said at his shoulder. "If you intend to give the cold the cut of your face, my king, at least dress for the duel." Jon glanced back with a smile that was as much apology as agreement. "I keep expecting to feel warmer when I look out and see it," he said. "As if the heart might flare for the north and force the blood to listen. It flares for the north well enough." Davos leaned his forearms on the parapet and hunched his shoulders. "I'll not speak for your blood. Mine is a stubborn thing. In White Harbor, I swear it retreated down into the liver and left the rest of me to shiver." "Ben?" A raven took that moment to cuff the wicker with its beak, a clack like a dry knuckle on wood. There were 3 birds in the cage and another in the rookery, but one had come in the dark with its little leather tube iced over, and Maester Wolkan had pried it off with a warming basin and news from the sea. "The Glover men will not like it," Davos said, not looking away from the yard. "Nor the Mormonts. The Ironborn took Deepwood Motte. They burned the stony shore. Raids have a long memory." "So do graves," Jon said. His breath drifted out, and the wind caught it. "But we need ships." Davos gave him a quick glance. He had the kind of face that had learned how to set itself to softness, so that men did not see how keenly it observed. "And you think she'll bring them with her?" "The sister. She brings herself," Jon said, "and her brother with her, if the Maester's reading is true. 7 save us, Theon Greyjoy in this hall." Davos' mouth shaped a grimace that could have been half smile, half warning. "There's an old word for that sort of thing. Trouble? Or folly? It rhymes with both." "Thou." Jon's hand, in its glove, tightened on the parapet. "He is not what he was when he left it," he said, "and not what he was when he came back. He is a man with his parts removed and his shame laid on him like a second skin." "Shame is not a part," Davos said. "It is a weight. Men carry it or cast it on others. We'll see which he prefers. And the sister? She is bold," Jon said softly. "Bold enough to come to Winterfell and set her foot where Ironborn have not stood in peace for 100 years." The snow had deepened while they spoke, a white whisper across the yard. Far below, Ghost turned his head toward the gatehouse. Jon heard the sound then, a distant creak of timbers, the bark and snort of horses, the muffled clack of hooves on frozen mud. He straightened, and Davos did too, and the 2 of them stood looking toward the road as if sight might reach farther if joined. When the party came through the outer gate, the wind brought with it a taste Jon had not known he missed. Salt. Not enough to smart the eyes, just a hint that rode beneath the smell of cold iron and damp wool. The men leading the horses wore patched wool and the long quilted coats of northern travel, but there was no mistaking them. The Ironborn walked like men on a deck, knees loose, a small rocking in their gait as if some muscle in the leg had learned, and not forgotten, the way a ship shifts at isolation points in the tide. Spears rode their shoulders. There were a few, only a dozen, if that. But the kraken stitched into black on a woman's breast was as loud as a horn. She dismounted without looking for a hand, and tossed the reins to one of her men without looking to see if he caught them. 2 knives rode her hips. Her hair had wind in it, her mouth did not. Another figure slid down beside her. Smaller, hunched inside his cloak, moving with a carefulness that spoke both of cold and of old wounds. The Greyjoys, Someone on the wall muttered, and made the words sound like a guttering candle. "Leave weapons," Jon called down. And the words carried because the yard knew them. "Keep your men close to you, and your hands open." Those are the terms of parley in Winterfell, as old as the first snow. The woman looked up toward the voice on the wall and found him easily. Her eyes were a sea color he could not name. They were not gray, not blue, not green alone. Some mix with iron filings in it. She touched the hilt of one knife with 2 fingers, and then lifted both hands slightly from her sides, in a gesture that was not surrender and not mockery either. "We come to speak," she said. "We come under flag and word. These hills have killed enough of my kin to teach me not to turn a parley to folly." Jon descended into the yard with Davos, and with Tormund Giantsbane lumbering along behind them, like a storm wrapped in furs, and with Lady Mormont, as small and stern as a winter bird. Lyanna's chin cut the air. She looked at Asha Greyjoy as a cat might look at a fox that had wandered into the yard, and asked the hens for water. The Ironborn woman had called herself nothing yet, but her men watched her as if names were both armor and anchor. The one at her side pushed back his hood. Theon Greyjoy's face had gone whittled in his absence. The cheeks were hollows, the brow too large, the eyes holding themselves the way a wounded animal holds breath. He opened his mouth and closed it again. "I know you," Jon said, "because there was no use pretending the world hadn't been small once. And you know me." "I do," Theon managed. "You, King in the North." The 2 large eyes flickered past Davos' face, landed on Tormund and flinched. "You held me while I howled once, and I bit you," he said, and then lowered his head as if the wind had slapped him. A murmur, and not a kind one, moved across the yard. It had more teeth than words. Davos did not move, but Jon felt the man steady himself beside him, like a boatman bracing. The woman at Theon's side spoke in a voice that had the salt in it, the easy rise and drop of a tide. "He knows what he did," she said. "I have told him twice for every time he forgot, and he has forgotten nothing." She turned her face to Jon. "I am Asha, of the Iron Islands. On the Greenlands they call me something else, because your tongues tangle in your own teeth. I answer to Asha. I answer to Captain. If you wish me to answer to Lady, then I'll have men at my back who call me so. I am not here to plunder your hall of titles." "You're here to parley," Jon said. "Come in from the cold." When she walked into the great hall of Winterfell, Asha Greyjoy did not stare at the carved beams, or the banners, or the steaming meat hauled from the kitchens. She took its measure the way a sailor takes the measure of a sky, with a quick eye for stresses, for the places where wind can run and sparks can leap. Her boots left melting snow prints on ancient flagstones. Her men went where the servants showed them and huddled, as men do in an enemy's warmth, wary and unthawed. Theon moved as if there were invisible cordage knotted around his limbs, and he dared not pull too fast, lest he find it tightened. Jon took the carved chair that had not been meant as a throne and wore the weight of the room without shifting his shoulders. Ghost lay to the left of the dais, head resting on his paws, eyes like pale coils of smoke. Lords of the North stood in a drifting semicircle. Manderly, great and boreal with fish stink in his cloak. Galbart Glover, whose mouth had become a wound that healed too slowly. Robert Glover, who looked at Theon and seemed to struggle with whether his hands were for strangling or for prayer. Alice Karstark, young and too still. Lady Lyanna Mormont, hands snug behind her back as if tying herself to conviction. Sansa sat to Jon's right, needlework forgotten in her lap, hair bright and precise. She did not look at Theon. She did look at Asha and did not blink. "Speak then," Jon said. "You have the road's hospitality and mine." "I bring you this," Asha said, and held up a folded thing that looked like a banner until she shook it out, and it proved to be only a net. A coarse net, patched and mended. She dropped it at the foot of the dais. That is what the Iron Islands are, these days. Nets and patches. We had a king's moot. We have a madman for king. He will set fire to the world to warm himself. Euron, Davos murmured, and made the name into a sourness. "Eh?" Asha's mouth bent in a way that was not a smile. "My uncle, Crow's Eye. He'd cut out the tongue of every man in my fleet, so he never had to hear the word no again if he could. He means to wage war on the world until it has only one god left, and it is him. I mean to see him hang on a cliff by the ankles till the gulls take his eyes and the crabs his tongue. I cannot," she went on after letting the ice of those words settle, "with what men I hate. I lost ships fleeing him. I ran with the brother I found, and with the men who kept their tongues. We sailed east. We saw smoke on Essos where a would-be queen gathers dragons like trinkets. We sailed back. The north has her teeth. The sea has mine. We might lend each other the other." Nando. There was a stir. Glover made a noise like a low-barked laugh. "The Iron Islands are friends? Will you give back Deepwood Moat with a kiss and a song, my lady? Or will you tell me the gold price for my dead?" Asha looked at him without flinching. "No gold price," she said. "The iron price the islands have paid and paid and paid, and it bought us nothing but salt sores and widows who cannot cook. House Glover's dead are on my list. I will not speak their names in this hall. I know them. If I could bleed the sea itself for them, I would, but it is water and has no veins." "And Imni." Lyanna Mormont let out a small sound, one that might have been scorn and might have been the other sharp thing children learn too soon. "Sorrow. The Ironborn took Bear Island folk with them when they went," she said. "We found boats empty of our own when the tide turned back." "Eh," Asha said, and her throat worked around whatever wanted to be said first. "And some of those women chose the oars. Do I say that here? They did. I have Bear Islanders on my ship who will not be told their hands are for milking cows when they have learned to draw a bow in a gale. They are free, and they do not want to be returned to men who will bind them for their own good." "Da." Lyanna's chin went higher. "If they are bears," she said, "and if they left choice, they will know the path home. No man or woman stops a bear when she means to go home. Then they will come when the sea does not have them." Asha said, "I have no quarrel with bears except the ones I made when I was young and stupid and believed what the old Wick priests sing. I am here to tell you this. The islands can be yours to trust or yours to fear. I cannot fight my uncle with the men I have. I can fight him with men who know winter, and a king who knows a storm is not an enemy you talk down. It is one you trim sail for and outlast." "A king," Manderley said dryly. "You propose a treaty with the king in the north after cutting his shore like cloth for your banners." "I propose a marriage." Asha said it as if she had set a knife on a table and wished to see who reached first. Her eyes were on John and did not leave him. "To me. To bind what the shore took and the ships feared to a thing that can hold while the world walks into night. There are sounds a hall makes that have nothing to do with speech. A man sucked a breath through teeth. Someone's cloak rasped stone. A chair leg scraped. Sansa's hand tightened on the cloth in her lap. "Get." Ghost raised his head and did not growl. Davos' mouth opened and shut. Tormund's eyebrows climbed and vanished into his hair. Lyanna Mormont did not move at all for a heartbeat, and then she turned her head and looked at Jon as if to say, "Well?" Jon did not look at Sansa. He did not look at Theon. He felt the weight of the wolfskin on his shoulders and the weight of the room and then thought, "Duty is not a sword you get to set down when the hand tires." He rose. "What would you swear?" he asked Asha. "In this hall, before these faces who have long memories, what would you swear to the north?" "Then." She did not rush her answer. Ironborn were men and women of angles. Quick knives, quick laughs, quick betrayals. This one knew when to slow. "No reaving of the north," she said. "No salt wives taken from your shores. No paying the Roman of grief in cattle and children. If a man of the islands wants a woman of the north, he will go ask her father's leave with fish on his beard and snow in his hair like any decent suitor." A small iron smile bared itself and went away. "No burning of your halls. But I will not have your men set laws on my islands that make us fishers without pride. We will fight when it is right to fight, and we will not kneel to any god but the one we were born to. Bah! You will not kneel to the king in the north? Robert Glover's voice had gone knife-thin. Then what is this? A game? A farce? You come to sell him for ships? Asha tilted her head. I will not kneel, she said. I will stand beside him. That word sat in the hall a moment, ignoring the drafts of cold that slid along the floor like cats. John found that his mouth had gone dry. He let his gaze swing to the carved weirwood screens and the great fireplace where logs spit sap and snapped, to the shadows high under the rafters where little drifts of snow fell through cracks and melted before they touched the air. He was not thinking of dragons or snow or duty for a long heartbeat, only of a woman on a deck in a storm, legs planted, eyes narrowed against the salt, saying, "Stand!" He heard the rustle of Sansa's needlework again and knew she was looking at him now. The look he'd learned as a boy. Try and fail and I will help. Reach for a thing unwise and I will call you a fool. Give us the hull, John said. His voice steadied of its own accord. The way ice can take weight after the creek has sounded weak for weeks. My sister stays. Lady Lyanna stays. Lord Glover. Lord Manderley. Sir Davos. Tormund if he promises to stop smiling like that. The rest may warm the kitchens. That thinned the hall to something quieter. The men he kept were 2 from stone, 2 from sea, 1 from Winter Hills, and 1 from hunger, turned into wry practice. Ghost lay again and watched. John came down the steps and stood on the flagstones where the net lay. He remembered the net suddenly, its patches, the small mendings. He stepped around it. Asha stood without shifting. Why me? John asked, not coy and not proud. Only as one asks the weather why. Not a boy with a river mouth to watch? Not a lord of the West Coast? Why me? Because you have a dead man's eyes, Asha said, and a living man's hands. And you do not frighten easy. The world's going to shake and drown and freeze and burn according to every story that drops from the tongues of drunks, widows, and priests. You may be a drunk or a widow or a priest for all I know. But when the shaking starts, I like the look of your feet. Manderley snorted despite himself. Lady Greyjoy, he said, you have a mouth like a dock. You have a belly like a ship. She returned and flashed him teeth. Between us we make a fleet. Sansa made a small sound. It was not laughter. What of the children you would have? She asked. What god will claim them? What banners will they wear? What shores will their feet learn first? This is not a jest for a night to warm men talking. This is a weaving you propose, and it will not come smooth without careful hands. Bah! Asha's glance shifted to Sansa and did not leave. Something respectful came into her face, not unlike the way a captain looks at another captain's ship when it is well kept. Your sister is the clever one, she said to John. I knew that when I walked in. I, Lady Sansa. Children, gods. Coats of arms. Teachings. We will fight that out under the roof that has room for argument. My uncle teaches men that the only coin in law is fear. I would rather pay with ink. Mentau. Lyanna Mormont's mouth twitched as if it wanted to be a smile, and had forgotten how. I've no love for krakens, she said. But I'd sooner argue under a roof than drown under a king who thinks his cock a scepter. If we are to do this, king in the north, we do it with terms strong as ice and plain as coal. John let out a breath he had not known he held, and the old joking thought flickered through him. How many times can a man not know what air he carries? He looked at Theon then. The Greyjoy did not raise his eyes. Speak, John said to him. I have no right. Theon whispered. You have a throat, John said not unkindly. Use it. Say you mean it. I will hear it, or I will throw you from my gate and let the dogs decide the rest. Theon's hands unclenched, clenched, opened again like small animals trying to learn a trick. I mean it, he said hoarsely. I will serve whatever peace is made. I will write the names Lady Asha keeps for the dead by my hand, and carry the list to the shore, and stand there in winter till the water eats my ankles, if the Glover men want me to. I have no wish for warmth. I know where it goes when it is wasted. Then all. Robert Glover's mouth moved on something bitter. If I let you live, it's not for your sake, he said. It's for the work your life might do. Dion said, and swallowed. I learned that on a cold night. In the God's Wood that evening, the snow fell so fine it was like breath. The red leaves draped themselves in thin white shawls, and the heart tree's face looked as it always did. Old, patient, faintly amused by the fuss men made over their own shadows. John stood before it and said nothing. Beside him he felt the sea move. A human sea, with boots and belt, and the faint creak of leather. Your priests sleep in trenches and breathe water through their noses, Asha said. Mine, any road. Yours carve their gods into trees and make faces on the wind. Seems a fair bargain. The sea is a tree that moves. The tree is a sea that refuses. Are you mocking? John said. The words wanted to be a smile, and did not manage more than politeness. No. I'm thinking. Asha walked forward till she stood nearly under the heart tree's dripping red boughs, and then stopped, as if she felt a line under the snow, and knew better than to try the ice blind. I always liked trees I didn't cut, she said. There aren't many in the islands. You still mean it, John said. What you said before the fire. Marriage. If you don't, say so, and I'll take my boots and your salt nuts and go. Asha said. I've been refused before. Not often. But once a man said he had no room in his heart for a woman like me, and I told him to hire another heart. This is different. You know it is. I am not here to pluck you for a story to tell in the heads. I am here because my uncle thinks to set his shadow on the world, and the world will be smaller for it, if no one ties a rope to the shadow. Many. John stared at the carved mouth, at the long split tongue of sap that had hardened to a crimson tear. He had known many vows. The Night's Watch had taught him how a vow could save a man's honor and also wreck his life. He was not afraid of wreckage. He was afraid of waste, of making a thing when there had been a better thing instead, if he had only bent his pride or his fear in time. I do not marry for love, he said. Good, Asha said. Neither do I. Not at first. He looked at her then, really looked. She had the weather on her skin. That fine roughened texture men got working outdoors and women got on ships. Tiny lines at the corners of the mouth that came of laughing with the whole face or clenching around wind. Her eyes were steady. There was no flinch in her. The North will require terms, he said. Stronger than any you have known. I hope so, she said. Weak terms are the slow poison of peace. Your people will submit to the judgment of the North in disputes between islanders and mainlanders, he said. Not in your own houses, not in your own faith, but on our shores, our law. My people hate your law like a stiff wind in the wrong direction. She said. They will curse me till their mouths dry up. They will spit on the snow because they cannot spit on the sea without it coming back to them. But they will do it if we have victory to point at, and a noose to show them if they refuse. He thought of Lyanna Mormont's little clenched hands. He thought of Robert Glover's mouth. He thought of Devos' quiet watchfulness and Tormund's big grin, and Sansa's needle in her lap like a tiny spear. He thought of the wall, white and blue and infinite, and the sound the night makes when something vast moves behind it. We will wed here, he said, and the word surprised him in its steadiness. Before the heart tree, and with a basin of seawater brought in from White Harbor to wash over our hands. You may bring a priest who prays to drowning. I will say nothing to stop him so long as he does not try to drown anyone except in words. Then, words are deep enough to drown most men, she said wryly. I'll bring Aaron if he can be pried off a rock and freed of his madness long enough to stand. More likely I'll bring a common godly man who knows how to pour water and not pour sense out of men's ears. And after, John said, you will take your ships to the stony shore and to Bear Island's waters and to Deepwood's coast. Not to raid, to keep others from raiding, to show your banners there in storm, and in stillness. If I hear of a single woman taken, a single child, a single net cut or barn burned, I will come to your home with men from 12 houses, and I will take back what I gave with more than words. Nemdurs. Asha's mouth quirked. You say that like a storm says it will throw a wave. I've no doubt of it. Her gaze moved past him, took in the godswood, the old black leaves under fresh snow, the slow circle of ghost as the direwolf looped the clearing. We will need witnesses, she said. Your sister, that little bear with the mouth, the great fish, the one-eyed old smuggler. The North trusts them more than it will ever trust me. My folk will bring some men who can speak the truth without choking. Bendshau. They will be heard, John said. They stood a while without speaking. The snow ticked on leather and stone. Far off a horn sounded once, twice. Mere practice at the gate, not alarm. The heart tree watched them with the same patient red wet eyes it had given to the world 500 winters ago. Die. You can call me Yara if it suits the room. Asha said at last, almost offhand. I know how green tongues twist. But when we stand under the tree and by the basin, say my name proper once. It's a silly thing. I have no patience for silly things. But I want that. Menetrau. Asha, John said, and the name fit his mouth cleanly. I will. The days that followed were long and narrow as needles. Thread after thread, drawn through cloth. Careful, taut. Winterfell learned to pluck sea knots. The Manderley men sent for barrels of brine and hauled them up the King's Road in creaking carts, so that a basin could be filled and refilled with water that had tasted kraken sometime in its life. Sansa had the basin polished till its face shone, and you could see yourself in it, clear as a prophecy you did not want. Davos wrote letters, and then wrote them again with his better hand, because the first set had looked like a storm, had tried to sign his name. Messengers slipped out like foxes and returned like dogs, tongues lolling with news. Lyanna Mormont took it on herself to be Asha's shadow and judge. She followed the Ironborn woman through the yards where the men practiced in the cold with blunted edges, through the smoke of the kitchens where cooks cursed and laughed and flicked fat on the flames, down into the cellars where Winterfell's warmth is banked like coals. She watched how Asha held a knife, and how she sat a bench, and how she gave orders to her men. You don't talk like men should obey you, Lyanna said once, frowning. You talk like they already do. Aye, Asha said and laughed with that quick flash of teeth. It saves time. Sansa, for her part, asked questions that were never about knives. She asked what the women did when ships were out, who planted and who fished, and who told the girls they had to stop climbing masts. She asked who taught the boys to stitch a split sail, and whether they were taught to stitch their own cuts as well. She listened with that tilted head concentration. Jon had learned meant that she was making a map inside her, of a land she would never walk. The sea eats foolishness, Asha said to her one evening by the kitchen fires, when the cooks had driven them from a bench and they'd sought another by a door where a draught blew strong. Men on rocks become less foolish by hunger, or they do not become anything at all. But there is a kind of pride that grows there like hard moss. It covers everything. It covers cruelty and calls it sport. It covers cruelty and calls it the way of the world. Her mouth twisted. It covers a girl who takes a husband's boat and turns it into her own and calls that happenstance. I am not blind, Lady Sansa. I have done things that will not be unmade. I am offering to make different things now. Metal into rings, as your smith says. Then? Theon kept to the edges of rooms. Once Jon came upon him in the yard at dusk, the light going blue in the way it goes when snow waits for night, so it can fall more freely. Theon stood by the practice butts with a bow in his hands and 3 arrows on the straw. 2 in the outer rings, 1 gone somewhere, lost in the frozen mud. You always loose too fast, Jon said, the way a brother says a thing that is not an insult and not a kindness either, just the truth as he remembers it. Theon started, then let out a breath that showed in the air and hung a moment. I always wanted to be first, he said. First to the mark. First to be praised. It seemed the same thing. It isn't, Jon said. I know. Theon looked at the straw as if it were a word on a page. I will not be first to anything now. So I must be last. Last to leave the shore. Last to eat. Last to deny someone what they need. If I have it. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had had more bones. It's a poor sort of man who learns only from loss, but it is still learning. On the morning they chose for the wedding, the sky was sullen and close. The snow had stopped. The cold had edged down to a clarity that made the pine needles ring when a wind fingered them. The basin had been carried to the god's wood by 6 men. It took that many not to stumble on the roots that ridged the path. Davos poured the seawater from a cask, and it starred with pale bubbles. There, he said softly, looking down at it. Home in a bowl. His voice did not know whether to be sad or content. The people who came were the ones you'd expect, and the ones you wouldn't. Robert Glover, shoulders set as if for battle, stood with his fists at his sides and did not spit. Manderley had a cloak that made him look like the down of a very large swan, and when Asha saw it, she bit her mouth to keep from smirking, and later did not quite succeed. Lyanna stood at the front, chin carved from Bear Island rock. Sansa came in a gown that made the winter look like it had color after all. Tormund appeared because one cannot stop a storm from passing by if it chooses to, and looked faintly disappointed that there wasn't going to be grappling or bloodletting, as if marriages north of the wall had set a different standard. Ghost circled and sat so close to the basin that his whiskers could have drunk from it. Asha wore black, as was her right, and a vest set with small hammered plates of oil dark metal that drank the light. She had a simple circlet of iron on her brow that could have been a chain link smoothed by 1,000 thumbs. She met Joan's eyes and nodded once. No fear in it, no brag, just the acknowledgement one fighter gives another before they begin. By the old gods, Jon said, and the words fell from him like stones dropped into a well. He took Asha's hand. It was warmer than he expected, scarred across the fingers like a net had once eaten there. By the seasons that carry us, by the winter that takes and the spring that returns, I bind my house to yours and yours to mine. I will lay my life between you and those who harm you. I will be the hand that does what the heart cannot, and the heart that stops the hand when it should. Then me. By salt and stone, Asha said. Her voice had the low thrum of decks under sail. By the storm I love and the tide I trust, I bind my ship to your shore and your shore to my ship. I will steer true when you call for north. I will reef when you say the wind is lies. I will not take what is not given. I will give you what I have that you need. Davos took their clasped hands and lowered them into the seawater. It was colder than winter's breath and tasted, when it splashed his wrist, of long distances. The heart tree looked down with its old red patience. In the hush, Asha's thumb moved against Joan's knuckles. A brief press as if to say, there. When it was done, men breathed again. Manderley made a noise like a kettle coming off the boil. Tormund slapped Jon once between the shoulders so hard his teeth clicked. Lyanna nodded curt satisfaction, and then scowled at Theon, as if to remind the world that some debts do not dissolve in holy water. Sansa stepped close to Asha and surprised them both. Perhaps herself most, by taking the iron-born woman's hands for a heartbeat, and holding them as if they were needles she had chosen carefully for a difficult piece of work. Welcome, she said, to this roof, if not to your own. Asha's mouth softened. That is more generous than I expected. It is as generous as I can be, Sansa said. That night, in a chamber where the hearth whispered, and the stones remembered too many voices, Jon poured 2 cups of something dark that Manderley's men had brought, a liquor thick as winter and sweet as regret. He handed one to Asha, and kept one. They sat not close and not far. You think this will work? Asha said. I can tell. You're a dangerous man for that. I think it might, Jon said, and drank. The liquid burned, and then settled into some part of him that had been hollow, since the night he put his hand on black ice, and felt it not melt. And when things might work, I would rather do them than wait to find the thing that will while the world burns around me. I have loved the sea because it did not love me back, Asha said. Men make too much of being loved. The sea is fairer than most husbands. It does not promise. It takes and it gives, and it does not pretend not to be itself. You are not a sea, but you are not a liar, either. They drank and listened to the fire. Snow slid from a roof somewhere with that muffled thud you feel in your bones. Ghost's tail brushed the rushes with a soft hiss. "This will not be a tender thing," Asha said after a time, as if she were sparing them both the absurdity of pretending to misunderstand. "Not at first. I do not know how to be gentle with men who do not ask me to be. I know how to set a sail and how to slew a ship in a crosswind, and how to draw blood without killing a man I will need tomorrow. I know how to laugh when the sky is black. I do not know how to come soft to a bed." Jon looked into his cup. The liquor made its own small bloody reflections. "I know how to keep a promise," he said. "I know how to lay a sword down. I know how to put a cloak on someone who is cold. Those will do for tonight." Bendarausaria. They did not come together in any way that bards would sing. They set their cups aside and took off heavy boots and heavier cloaks, and lay down like two travelers choosing to share a fire, because the road was long, and it was wiser to keep close. Asha's breath slid along his throat, and he did not flinch. Jon's hand lay on her shoulder with the weight of a vow, not a claim. They slept, and if they woke, it was only to listen to the winter talking in its many voices. Morning came with work. It seemed the marriage had been a hinge on which the whole castle swung. Messengers gathered like crows on a carcass. A Glover man came with his jaw set and left with a letter tucked into his belt that said, in Jon's hand and with Asha's countersign, that any ironborn boat found within 3 miles of a certain spit of stone would be fired without parley. A Manderly scribe drew up contracts for timber to be traded for herring and cod. Asha looked at the figures and grunted approval, then sent one of her men to tear a strip of cloth from a sail and bring it so that she could sign with Kraken's ink. Lyanna Mormont oversaw the affixing of seals with a delight that startled Jon. The girl liked law, and this, he realized, might be what saved them all. Childish joy turned into stubborn guardianship of the thing that made lives possible. There were setbacks. A fight broke out in the yard when a Glover boy spat on the deck planks that Asha's men had carried in as models for a rebuilt jetty. An ironborn man hit him with a flat hand, and 6 northerners surged like a wave. Tormund waded in and laughed and lifted 2 men at once by the scruff like mother bears with pups until everyone stopped trying to kill each other out of sheer bewilderment. Sansa spent half a day in the kitchen, sorting which fish were acceptable for a feast, and which were too much like gnats with bones, and came out with hair loosened around the temples, and a kind of amusement that had not visited her face in years. That night, a raven came from White Harbor with 2 pieces of news. The first was that Lord Wyman would put his warships at Jon's call if the Iron Islands kept their oaths for a moon's turn. The second was that a ship from Old Town had come in with tales of the dead walking in the marshes south of the Neck, and men missing where there ought to be footpads and frogs only. Jon felt a cold in his bones, a different cold than winter gave. "We have less time than we like to pretend," he said to Asha when they stood on the wall and looked out across the white world. The dusk had come up from the ground, the way it does in snow. It seemed to bloom there. Faintly blue at first, and then darker as the world remembered the night. "I need your ships on the western shore, not to fight men alone, to carry them, to carry dragonglass when we have it, to move people away from places where the dead will come in numbers we cannot face in open ground." "The dead don't fear water," Asha said. Her breath made a little star and blew away. "Or they fear it and walk anyway. I have seen men wade for land with their eyes gone and their mouths full of words they do not know in their own tongues. But my men are quick on ladders and ropes. We can haul a village into a hold in under an hour if the wind is with us and the people do not scream and fight their saviors." "Bah!" "They will scream," Jon said, "and they will fight. They will think the Ironborn have come back for their daughters. You will have to save them anyway." Asha's mouth made that sideways working motion again. "That is a price I have bought many times and rarely for anything worth the coin," she said. "But I will." If we do this, we do it ugly and fast, and with no glory for anyone but warmth in the end." They were silent a while. Far below, a torch moved along the inner wall like a firefly. The great court lay under its new white cloth. A raven croaked to itself, and shook its black feathers once, twice, so that tiny sparks of snow shook free. "I will send word to the captains I trust," Asha said finally. "There are not enough of them, but it will be a start. They will grumble and swear, and ask me why we do this, and I will tell them that if they wish to see another spring, they will do as I say. And I will tell them that I mean to hang my uncle from a cliff by his ankles, and they can help me, or they can be mistaken for him in the fog when I come with a rope." "Them?" John allowed himself a thin smile. "And after? When spring comes? If it comes." "After," Asha said. "We will argue. Your sister will argue best, and I will lose most often. And I will take to sea to remind myself that I am not a fool. The north will grumble, and the islands will curse, and we will bury so many dead that it will feel like a new trade. And some boy named for a lord I have never liked will marry some girl named for a ship I nearly sank, and their children will not know why their grandfathers hated each other. That is after." "Dannen?" "A fair after," John said. "Better than any I have been promised before." She said, and then turned and looked at him hard enough that the air between them seemed to tighten. "You will not sicken of salt," she said. "When I leave for the sea, you will not call me back as if my heart were a tether to your small needs. This hall, this land, this cold, this is your home. I will love it as well as I can. But if I cannot make my keel sing now and then, I will sour in your bed and on your words. Can you live with that?" "Da." "Yes," John said, and did not have to think. He knew men who had tried to keep hawks tethered. He had seen what it did to their hands and to the bird, and there was nothing more miserable than a creature made for the high air trained to keep its eyes down. Below them, the gatehouse horn sounded twice. Not practice. It had a different shape to it. The sound placed itself in Jean's chest like a stone. He leaned forward. A rider had come in at speed. Horse slathered, man hunched and swaying. The courtyard moved, men running, a line of light opening as someone swung a torch in an arc to signal readiness for news. "Your wedding present arrives early," Asha said under her breath. The edge of a smile cut on it like a scraper's work. "That is how my people give gifts sometimes, with sharp corners." John was already moving for the stairs. Ghost stood with him before he had thought to whistle. Asha matched his pace without asking, and the three of them went down into the yard like a promise. One white, one dark, one bearing the weight that only men carry. The rider staggered from the saddle and nearly fell. Davos caught his arm. "Slow," the smuggler said, and made the word into a blanket. "Slow and speak. We'll hear all of it if you let your heart keep time." The man coughed pink into the snow, and then straightened like a rope being pulled tight. "From the last hearth," he managed. "From the umber lands. The dead came through the trees without sound. We lit beacons. We sent children south. We cut them down, and they stood up. Blue eyes." He shuddered. "There are too many. We ran. We took the horse and ran. They do not run. They walk." His mouth worked. "But they keep coming, and the sound of them." "There's no sound," Tormund said grimly. "That's the worst of it." He turned his head and spat. A small dark hawk in the white. "Well then, I was getting bored of law." Asha Greyjoy lifted her chin and spoke to one of her men, in a lightning-fast braid of words from the islands. He took off at a dead run, and in moments 2 more Ironborn had joined him. And then 3 more. And then a boy who could not have had whiskers more than 2 winters old, but carried his oarman's shoulders, as if they were a man's arms, not a boy's hope of being one. Asha turned back to John and found his eyes with hers. The yard around them shivered once, twice, and then steadied into the particular stillness of a hall that knows it will be very noisy soon. "Let us see," Asha said. Whether nets and patches will hold a storm. They will, Jon said, and believed it as a man believes what his own hand has built. If we hold them tight, if we mend while we fight, if we do not stop until the last stitch is made. And then there was work, and the deep, hot calm that comes when fear finds an order to walk in. Men ran to the armory, women to the hearths that would heat water, melt snow, soften leather. Davos and Sansa stood over a table and drew lines with charcoal, no thicker than hair across parchment, while Manderly argued for protecting a road, and Lyanna insisted on sending bears to a village she named, without looking. Tormund laughed his great open laugh as if to dare the night to choke him with it. Theon fetched what he was told to fetch, and did not pause for breath until someone pushed a cup at his mouth, and he drank it without tasting and ran again. Ghost moved like silence through the noise. Asha watched it unfold for a heartbeat longer than a heartbeat, taking the measure not of stone and timber as she had when she first came into the hall, but of men and women, of their frays and strengths, of how they took a command, and whether they passed it on or set it down to see if it would roll under a bench. She nodded once, as if to herself. Then she went to the yard where her Ironborn had gathered, and the language of the islands cut the air. Rig the sledges, lash the rope ladders to them, bring the small boats out of storage and set them on runners. We'll haul them over the snow and use them like bridges. Saxes to the front, spears to the sides. No brave fools. Her voice sharpened, and the men sharpened with it. And listen, if you see a girl with a bear's mouth, you do as she says, even if it means you jump into a fire. If you see a boy with gray eyes and a look that says he knows you better than you know yourself, that's the king of this snow. You do as he says even if it sounds like death. It will be death anyway if you don't. Men too. Captain, one of her men said. Not loud and not soft. And the word landed in the yard like a piece of iron that would be a tool when it cool. Asha looked once more toward Jon, and he toward her, and in the between of their gazes, there was an understanding made not of sea or snow, but of something else. It would have to do. The horn sounded again. The dead, somewhere, were walking. The living here began to move. And winter, indifferent as the sea and no kinder than a storm, reached out a white hand and covered the old scars until, for a little while, the world seemed smooth and whole, and ready to test every seam they had sown. The raven's tail did what fear always does in Winterfell. It divided the hall into those who spoke and those who started moving. The ones who spoke never stopped for long though. Their words became a shape the rest could run inside. Sansa's hand found parchment. Davos found quills. Manderly found figures. Tormund found laughter that cut the air like a knife cutting a loaf. Broad and crude and necessary. Jon's voice found the old pitch it took, when orders had to be given in a way that made men remember them with their hands. 3 lines, he said, soot smearing a clean map into a truer one. Not walls. Lines. Fire in shallow trenches. Rope ladders and poles for the drifts. Pitch at the joints. We pull back from last harvest fields. We do not let them take men piecemeal in hedgerows and stone pens. We fight where the ground is ours. Benchawa. The ground's white and theirs besides, Tormund said cheerfully. But I. Dragon's glass, Robert Glover said, as if spitting the absence of it. How many bags? How many arrowheads hammered at Eastwatch and rotting in somebody's closet while we count how cold our hands are? Not enough, Davos said. Honest as a bruise. We'll use what we've got to point the meanest hands. The lads who can put a shale point through a flea's backside at 50 paces get the glass. The rest take oil, fire, and stout hearts. Whites burn. White walkers. He let the rest of the sentence be a shared hunger. The king's blade may take one if it comes to it. Valyrian's the other coin. Mine's not a mint, Jon said. We'll use the dead man's tricks. Heat and light. Lines, not knots. He lifted his gaze. Lady Lyanna. Your bears hold the second line. If the first breaks, you keep it from breaking fast. Lyanna's chin bobbed once, sharp as the tip of a spear. We'll teach your line to behave, she said. If it runs, we'll trip it and make it think better. Asha, Jon said. And the name didn't have to be declared. It lived in the room now. Your men take the sledges, ladders, small boats on runners. You move people where we point. Villages south of the Umberlands first. Farmsteads near the long lake mouth. No sermons on which men are worth saving. She was already nodding. You'll have screams. They always think the last raiders brought the next ones. We'll tie them in and pull anyway. If a man bites me, I bite back. If a woman bites me, I laugh louder. Mentor. Sansa drew a coal line on the map. A thin black thread that snagged at every village like it couldn't help itself. We need signs, she said. Colors the villagers know. If they see a blue flag tied to a pole, they run to it, not away. If they see 3 white strips knotted on a rope line, they know there's a boat and they should not stampede. Blue's my family color, Manderley rumbled. White strips I can set by the dozen. And listen, my men know the long lake shore like they know their wives' hips. I've skiffs that ride ice to water and back again, and the poles to test it. I'll put them on wheels, Lord Snow. Wah. Put them on runners, Asha said. Wheels are for stones, runners for skin. Doesn't make a lick of sense, but that's the sea. Manderley muttered, half to himself, already making numbers into men and men into knots. Theon stood at the edge of the table and didn't touch it. He looked at each point, as if the charcoal marks were doors he'd have to knock on, and asked to be let through. When Sansa's eyes brushed him, he lowered his gaze, as if it had burned. You, Jon said without turning his head. Take 10, quiet ones. No banners. Ride to the last hearth. You'll not make it by the time the fighting starts. I know. You will turn when you see their fires, if they still burn, and you will run before the tide, looking for stray children where men have already decided the rest are lost. Bring me anything that breathes. Theon stared a heartbeat too long, and then nodded once. Anything that breathes, he said, hoarse. They bled out into the courtyard, then into the roads. Day laid its colorless hands across the snow and pressed it flat. The horse's breath pooled like spilt smoke. The men's voices made little clouds that broke on each other and dissolved. Asha's ironborn hauled boat bellies across creaking sledges, oars nested like bones, nets coiled like the old habits of hands. She moved among them with quick words and quicker fingers, loosening some knot here, tightening another there, laughing when a boy overthrew a coil and it bit him, cuffing his ear and showing him how to do it right. Lyanna strode with the bears, calling names as if they were battle cries. Mage blood to me, Mormont cousins, shields high. If your hand shakes while you light a trench, I'll have your elders rap it from the grave. Davos took a cloak and a ledger and turned himself into a fire. Wherever he paused, men warmed their courage on him, as if the old smuggler had found a way to keep the coal of his own stubbornness hot and hand it out. Manderley climbed into a sleigh and made it groan, and the men set to pulling as if the burden were laughter, and they couldn't help but take their share. Tormund walked, because walking was what he had learned to do when marching with death at his back, and he wheeled the wildlings like he wheeled a storm through a pass. Shouts, jokes, sudden cuffs that bred grins instead of grudges. Jon took Ghost and the best riders he could spare, and the world narrowed to the sound of hooves drumming on hard snow and the singular sweet-sour smell of cold leather. His cloak hit his calves like a tired hand with every stride, reminding him of the weight he wore. The snow held the sound down. The sky had the flat, ugly white of wool left too long in a tub. They reached the first village before noon. It had a name older than its stones, carved into a lintel the last time someone could afford a chisel. Now it was all low roofs and one longhouse and a god's pole. A child had smeared with berry juice in the shape of a heart's face. Smoke made a soft finger that brushed away with the lightest wind. A dog barked 3 times, forgot why, and went back to being a dog. Blue flags, Sansa had said. Think of the children first. They always know the flags because children see colors the way men see coin. There were no flags. There were footprints, men's, women's, little boot prints with one toe worn through. There were drag marks where someone had hauled a trunk and then given up and sank down in the middle of the road. The trunk sat there now with its lock prized off, and inside only a folded sheet with a baby's smell lingering, faint as fresh bread across a field. Jon put 2 fingers to his lips and blew the high keen they'd agreed would name friend to friend in white weather. A door opened. A woman's head appeared and vanished. Another door, but only a crack. And then the shout from the lane. Not fear, but the ghost of it. King in the... "We're here to move you," Jon said, turning his horse so the words fell down the road like chopped straw. "Now, pack nothing. Take your cloaks. Asha's men will pull you. My men will light the road behind." When he said Asha's name, the first woman who'd looked out flinched like a whip had kissed her. "Ironborn," she spat, and the word was a taste she couldn't stand to hold in her mouth. "Have you lost the sense the gods gave a goat?" "We're not raiding," Asha said from right behind Jon's horse, where she had appeared like a joke. "We're stealing you. You'll clutch my men's hair and howl at me later. For now you get on the sledges, or I'll sling you like cod." The woman's mouth opened. The words died there, not because Asha was fearsome, though she was, but because the Ironborn in her shadow were already laying ladders, setting a boat on its runners, across a churned drift, where the road dipped and became a frozen churn of hooves. Asha pointed, and men lifted, and the boat settled like an old gull into snow. Lyanna's voice cut the air. "Bears with the children, bears with the hearth lame. You in the leather cap, stop crying and pick up your mother. She had you once, now you get her." The voice turned, aimed. You with the gut and the dumb face. Stop staring at the Ironborn and take this rope. When I say pull, you pull. When I say stop, you freeze." "I'll freeze anyway," the man muttered. And then, meeting Lyanna's small dark glare, "Aim, lady." Jon didn't wait to see if it took. He swung down and started lifting bodies himself. The first man he put on a sledge hissed in his ear, "The Krakens," and Jon said, "Aye," without anger. Fear has only one kind of back you can push, and it isn't the kind that bends. Ghost moved through the crowd like a memory, white and soft-footed. Children found him with their hands without looking, the way children find fire when adults have told them not to. They buried fingers in his thick winter coat, and their eyes changed. Just a little, from crackled glass to something that could thaw. A boy with a rash on his cheeks buried his face in Ghost's neck and made a small sound Jon had not heard in years. A small mew of relief that belonged to babes and the very old. The first sledge went. The boat glided like a seal across the dip. Asha's men pulled and put their heads down, and there was grunting. But there was no panic. Panic is noise. This was a song with no words. A rhythm men find when they all do one thing together and stop being parts for a little while. Another sledge, another. The village emptied. The houses went lighter, and the sky, lifting a little, went darker for that. When the last door opened, Theon was at it. He had broken from his 10 and come back with a look in his face Jon recognized from his own nightmares. The look of a man who had seen a small room with no windows and predicted its dimensions with his breath. "She won't come," he said, voice low, to Jon's shoulder. Theon never looked Jon in the face now. He looked at the place where Jon's breath touched the air. "Old. Pick. Says she was born in that bed, and she'll die in that bed, and I told her the bed will walk if she stays. And she said then she'll die, standing on it to shame me. Now." Jon brushed past him and went inside. It was warm, which somehow made it worse. Warmth in the face of the cold to come felt like a lie. The woman was no older than 50, but the winters had pressed their thumb hard. Her hands were rope, the always red kind. Her eyes were a watery blue the North knows and respects. "I'm the king," Jon said, gentle as he could make it. She snorted, which he had expected and liked her for. She said, and turned to the shelf where she kept little wooden gods. She closed her fist on one, and then looked at the fist in disdain, and opened it again. "They're not good for heat. They're good for remembering," Jon said. "You can remember on the sledge." You can remember on the boat. You can remember in the hall at Winterfell with hot broth in your hands and your feet in someone's lap because you said your toes hurt and the boy you said it to didn't dare argue. Bender. What boy's lap will let me? She asked tartly, but her mouth softened around the words, which was all Jon expected to win. I had a son, she said abruptly. He went to the wall. He wrote once. He's dead now or not writing. I had a daughter. The Ironborn took her. She took herself, maybe. The world doesn't distinguish between two kinds of loss. I don't see why I should. Jon stood very still. Come with us, he said. And if we live, we'll make losses into names. We'll put them on a board and men will curse them, and laugh about them, and point at them, and feel less alone. She stared at him, and then nodded once, as if he'd made a prayer to a god she happened to respect. Give me an arm that doesn't shake, she said. I've got enough of my own. Theon came as if called by the word alone. He held out his arm and did not look at the floor. She laid her hand on it, surprised by steadiness. Your face, she said with cruel honesty. It's a map of the kind of pain men don't forgive other men for. Yes, Theon said. Good, she said. I prefer a map I can read. They got her onto the sledge. The last rope pulled. The village emptied. Asha pointed, and her men took the rear with axes and wreaths of oiled cloth. When they reached the crest where the road dropped toward the white line of the long lake, Jon turned, out of the habit that had brought him alive through too many retreats, and looked back. The woods were quiet. That was the lie. The silence was full of promise in the way a drawn arrow is full of promise when the bow is at the cheek and the hand hasn't loosed yet. He couldn't see them. He felt them in his teeth. They got the villagers across the open like a needle through cloth, as Sansa had promised. Quick and without snagging, Asha's boat bridges took the weight without complaint, her men's boots finding the balance as if it had been taught to their feet when they were babes. The sledges hissed across hardpack like long sighs. The bears moved in bunches, brown and grim, and absurdly small under their furs and pride. Lyanna at their center like a nail-heads hold beams together. They lit the first trench when the trees on the far side shivered in a wind Jon did not feel. The fire ran in a line, bright and sudden. Men cheered because men cheer for fire in winter, even when it is their own doing. When the dead came out of the trees, they came like men walking home, not hurried, not slow, and that was why men's hearts stuttered in their chests. The casualness of it, the terrible indifferent patience. Blue eyes and faces that had no right to be anyone's anymore. Fingers stiff as sticks, gripping sticks made into spears. A girl in a torn dress with frost-like lace on her hair. Her feet bare. A rope around one wrist that trailed in the snow like a wedding ribbon no one had cut. Or arrows, maybe arrows fletched with the wrong feathers. Jon's mind made these similes to keep from naming what they were. Steady, he shouted, and then cursed himself because nothing could steady the human heart except faith and habit, and you could only call on the second when the first had run out. Arrows took the first rank of wights. They fell in untidy heaps and then got back up, riddled with shafted wood, offended only by the inconvenience. Pitchpots burst on the frontmost and made little sons of men, which walked a dozen more paces before collapsing with theatrical dignity into the ditch. The smell. Gods. The smell. Every cook fire in the north had taught men to love the smell of fat when it pops. This was the inversion of that love, and it went into the bones and set up its home there. The line held. The dead walked into the flames with the gravity of men who had been told by their fathers and their fathers' fathers that you did not argue with a road. Their hair caught, their eyes guttered, their hands dropped things and then found them again because the hands did not care about pain. The ditch burned down as trenches do. The fuel is never equal. There are always thin places in law and fire both. The first thin place showed itself when a pair of wights fell across each other and made a bridge, and another stepped onto them with the institutional calm of a man being told by a steward where he was to sit at a feast. Right flank, Tormund bellowed, voice a joy disguised as terror. Come on then. Come on, you cold bastards. He met the first that crossed with a swing that would have taken the head off a bull. The steel bit. The head came free, and the body stood a half heartbeat longer with hands that could not decide what to do without a mouth to tell them. And then it toppled. Fire leapt from a burning forearm and took the dry hem of a cloak, and men beat at it with their own hands because sometimes you are what your reflex makes you, and the reflex is old and stupid. Jon found the shape of the fight, the way a man finds the shape of a song when he can't remember the words. But his feet recalled the turn. He had fought things like this before, at Hardhome, on a broken stretch of shore where the water had not known whether to freeze or to rise. He had learned there that courage is often the memory of not dying, and that it can be taught if you stand where men can see you, when they will otherwise choose to look at the ground. He moved along the ditch and listened for the phrase pitch. When it went high, panic, thin as ice, he waded in. When it went low, rage, thick as porridge, he let it be. Ghost stayed where the line wanted to tear, placing his great pale body there as if he were a post set into earth. Men will not break around a dog they love, even when he is a wolf. The dead kept coming. That was their trick. Not cleverness, not speed, not axe craft, not the beautiful economy of a good swordsman's parry. Persistence chewed men's hearts into gristle. The first ditch burned down to black river stones and ash. The second took light when Davos shouted and dropped a torch. It crawled along like a patient weasel looking for a hole. The third waited its turn, and that was the worst of it. The waiting. Asha had her sledges running like shuttles across a loom. When a village's bundles were loaded, she sent it back empty, and it came back with the smell of fear and hot leather, and once the little sweet stink of baby's milk on a rag. Her men did not look at the dead when they didn't have to. They looked at ropes, at knots, at ladders. They looked at each other's faces. Asha did not look much at all. She listened, which is how captains see 2 miles beyond the prow in fog. She listened for the changes in men's voices that meant someone was about to choose wrong, and she put a hand there, on shoulder or elbow or the back of a neck, and the choice unwound itself before it tightened. On a rise to the left, a group of whites had begun to climb over the backs of their own fallen into a wound in the ditch, where the fire died too fast, a dark mouth being fed itself. Lyanna saw it and didn't call anyone. She went with her bears. 7 girls and 2 women, and a man with a face carved out of misfortune. They ran with their heads low like hunters. When they got there, they did what bears do. They set their feet and pushed, shields at an angle, and their weight was stone. They were small, and the dead were numberless. It didn't matter. They were the fixed thing in a world that cannot bear a fixed thing for long. And that little moment of defiance is worth every ballad that never gets sung. Theon found children, as Jon had told him he would, but not where he had expected. They were not huddled in a loft or a root cellar. They were in the godswood of a little holdfast that had never seen a lord and had one half-rotted heart tree that the farmer's wife had used to hang herbs from in summer and lanterns from in winter. The children stood under it because their grandmother had told them once that when you want to be invisible, you should stand where the gods are looking at something else. Their grandmother had died 2 winters ago. They had remembered anyway. He coaxed them with his whole body, not his voice. Voices were for men who were owed respect. He kept his hands open and empty and showed them the little trick he had learned with mice as a boy. How to make your cheeks hollow so it looked like you had a sweet hidden there, even when you didn't. When a boy came forward, glaring at him like a bastard names a father, Theon took the hatred and put it in his pocket and did not look at it. He made his palms flat and let the boy put his fingers on them. "Your hands are cold," the boy said, contemptuous and curious. "Yes," Theon said, "but I can run fast with you on my back." He turned, crouched, and did not look behind to see if the boy came. He felt the sudden weight and stood into it. It felt like something had been put in place in him that had rattled since a long night when men said his name and meant a dog. On the main line, Jon miscounted his breaths and had to make them steady. He heard a sound that wasn't a white and wasn't a man. It was a ringing, thin and bright, like an icicle breaking just so. He turned and saw the first white walker. It was at a distance that always seemed shorter after. the way pain seems sharper when you're done with it. Tall, because tall means what it means, even when language goes soft around bigger things. Blue eyes like a clear well over stone. Armor that looked like frost had decided to hold a shape for a while and see if it liked how men looked at it. It didn't run. It walked with the grace of a man for whom the world had been planned. The whites around it moved with more purpose, not cleverness, not cunning, but the way ants move better when the queen is in the nest, and the nest is whole. Jon felt that thing old in his chest, the old cold from the wall, from the night a hand had clamped down on his cloak, and he had thought it was a friend, and then realized it was a joke the dead tell. He moved toward it, and felt ghost move with him, with the inevitability of a tide against a shore. The men around him went quiet. That was good. Quiet makes room for luck. The walker stepped over the char and the bodies without seeming to notice that men spill when cut. It lifted the spear it carried and held it behind, like a dancer testing a position. Jon thought of the words he had learned at the end of the world. Dragon glass. Illyrian dot. It. He had Longclaw. It hummed in his hand like a thing that knows it is being asked finally to do what it was made for. Hold, he said, and it was not a shout. Men held. Ghost's breath made little flowers in the air, and then shattered. The walker moved. Quick. The spear came and the air burned with the cold of it. If cold can burn, it can. And Jon twisted and felt the spear kiss his cloak where it hung behind. Felt the drag of it, the petty anger of cloth torn. He brought Longclaw up and felt the jar of contact. The sword sang. The walker's weapon took a nick it did not like. Its head turned. Slow and inhuman. To consider the imperfection in its perfect world. Jon stepped inside the next thrust, the way he had once learned to step inside a bully's punch, because you can't be hit it as hard at that range. He felt, what? Nothing. The space around the walker was a place where air didn't want to live. He cut. The blade rang again, and the sound went up, and something answered in the woods far off, thin and far and hateful, and the walker stepped back, surprised. That was the shape of the fight. Surprise, like a coin you get to spend once. Jon spent it and pressed, and the walker, if it had eyebrows to raise, would have raised them. It moved its spear and the line of dead behind it moved in sympathy. Shifting. Turning as a flock does when the first bird decides the wind is lying. Now, Davos barked, far away and inside Jon's head both, and torches flew, and arrows lit, and a pot broke with a satisfying obscenity. Fire climbed up a dead man like a boast, and threw his light on the walker's frost. Jon saw himself in that light, and did not like what he looked like. A man leaning toward a thing no man should want to touch. He moved again because motion is sometimes a doctrine, and because stillness is death if you don't choose it. The spear came up. He slid so close he could have kissed the walker, if kissing were a thing the dead had any use for. Longclaw bit the spear's haft and slid, sparks like insects, and then, oh blessed god of steel, found flesh. If that glimmering shell can be called flesh. It parted. The sound was like a cold stream finding a new bed. The walker's mouth opened. No breath. No cry. The mouth opened because the head wanted to open. The body came apart like hoarfrost, struck from a branch at dawn. It shattered, yes, and it became air and 100 slivers of sky-thin ice, and then not even that. The whites that had been nearest it stuttered as if the hand inside them had lost its place on the strings. Some fell. Some turned. Some kept walking because habit is the last god men kneel to. Back! Jon shouted, because he had learned to fear luck more than he feared cold. Back to the second trench. Pull. They pulled. Pulling in war is shame in some men's mouths and wisdom in others. It is the wisdom of not letting your blood ruin your clothes for the sake of a storyteller's line. They moved. The last of the village sledges broke into the open snow, and the small boat slid where the ditch made the world into stripes, and Asha's men hauled like oxen that knew a song. A wyke got onto the boat's nose and started toward a child, tied down with the thick rope sailors use for bad weather. Asha didn't shout. She went forward on the boat with an easy, ugly grace and hit the dead thing with the flat of her hawk-nosed axe, and it went off the side and under the runner. And when it appeared again out of the churned snow, the child was laughing because men are fools and children are criminals, and both love a neat trick. By dark, they had held and fallen back, and held again. They had brought a village out and sent it south under Manderley seals, down the road that Sansa had committed to memory, with the implacability of women who have learned that if you forget anything, the world will kill it in front of you. They had lit trenches in 3 places and set new ones in 5, and learned where the wind helps fire and where it pushes it down to sulk. They had found that whites don't like ropes drawn low along the snow, not because rope stops them, but because they trip. And while they get up, the time it takes buys breathing space men can spend on something not dying. Lyanna wrote it down on a piece of board in charcoal. She stuck behind her belt as if she meant to make a book of it when this was done, and may the gods give her 1,000 unremarkable afternoons to do it. They made a camp that was not a camp, because winter lets you camp only in the way a landlord lets a man stay on without paying. Reluctantly and with constant threats. Fires went low and wide. Pots of water steamed. Salt pork hit iron and became smell that said, "Remember summer." Men did not speak much. The words had all been used up in the day and had to be hawked back into the mouth if anyone wanted them again. Sansa moved through the camp in a cloak that took the firelight and made it into law. Men straightened when they saw her the way they straighten when a child watches them, and they want to be caught being brave. She checked bandages, not because she knew better than the women who'd tied them, but because the tie of her checking was a knot that held spirits together. She lifted a cup to a boy whose fingers shook and held it in a way that made the shaking a smaller thing. She set an old man to tell a story, and the old man told one he had told his sons when they were little. And for a moment, the world returned to him as it had been, and not as it had become. Asha came back with snow caught in her hair like salt. She sat without ceremony on the stump of a tree that had been alive enough not to want to be firewood, and then had had no say. She rested her forearms on her knees and stared at nothing, which is how sailors sleep with their eyes and wake with the other parts of themselves. "Hungry?" Sansa asked. "Yes," Asha said, and took the bowl Sansa had in her hand because it was a polite thing to do, and because she was in fact hungry. "I counted 67 faces on the boats," she said. "Not all from that place you started in. Some from a croft I wouldn't have seen if the boy with the rash on his cheeks hadn't pointed at the sky and said his father was there." "Was he?" Sansa asked. "Oh, aye," Asha said dryly. "Hanging in a tree, what was left. Wind has a sense of humor." Sansa did not flinch. She had used up her flinches. "You moved them," she said. "Tomorrow, we will move more." Asha nodded and chewed. "Your sister's orders were clear." She said, mimicking Davos' rough burr in a way that made Sansa almost smile. "Your sister," she amended, "has a way of putting a loop on a man's pride and tugging until he thinks it was his own idea to be humble. She is my sister," Sansa said. "And she is herself." "And you are king and yourself," Asha said. "That's rarer." Sansa's eyes flicked past her to where Jon sat with Ghost's head on his boot, speaking in low tones to Tormund and Davos, while Manderley's snores made a bass line under everything. The firelight made his face and unmade it, the way it does. It showed the tiredness in the eyes and the wild white in the wolf's fur, and then it stole both and returned them changed. "He is tired," Sansa said, as if that were not a thing the world already knew. "So am I," Asha said. "It doesn't matter. I'll have a longer nap when I'm dead. Not a better one, mind. The dead look restful, but I've never envied them the bed." "Then now," Sansa raised an eyebrow. "You speak of death as a neighbor you borrow flour from." "I grew up on rocks," Asha said. "We have few neighbors and fewer friends. We borrow flour from the grave as often as from the living." She set the bowl down and turned her hands palm up, finding with her thumbs the little scars the net had left, the fine shiny patches that never quite returned to flesh. "Your sister said children?" "In?" You asked me in the hall what banners my children would wear. I thought on it while I pulled rope. I thought I'd not think of it. Not until spring. Not until the sea went anything but iron. But it crept in. It asked me if I am the sort of woman who can make a boy wear a kraken on his chest and not hate me for it. I don't know. I know that the sea will ask a child to love it, and he might. I know your snow will do the same. Banners are things we tie on afterward and pretend they are the cause, not the consequence. Nah. Sansa said nothing for a long moment. The fire popped. Someone muttered in sleep, the way a man mutters when soup is too hot and he drinks it anyway. If we live, Sansa said softly, we will put a kraken and a direwolf on one field, and we will argue about which side is the right and which is the sinister. And someone will tell me it matters, and I will tell them it does in ways they don't understand, and then I will send a child to bed early for speaking back. Asha's mouth crooked, and he'll throw a fit and I'll laugh, and then take him out to a boat at dawn to show him how the world looks when men are sleeping and gulls think they own it. Sansa's eyes went lower, to Asha's hands. Your scars look like thread. They are, Asha said. Old thread. Men love to cut nets. The sea loves to cut fingers. We love to bind ourselves back together. It's vanity. It's stubborn pride. It's the only skill we have that the gods don't. When the camp settled, never silence, not with so many alive and clumsy with their living, Jon crawled into the tent the Manderley men had raised like a cake frosted with rime. Ghost's head nosed the flap aside and followed him. Asha came a breath later, crossing into the dim warmth where breath hung like ghosts. They did not speak for a while. The kind of quiet between them felt more useful than any exchange of words would have been. It had the character of two oars picked up and set down together, in time. He pulled his shirt over his head to rub the sweat and smoke off his chest with a cloth, and the scars on him caught the lamplight. Old white, the strange puckered ones on his breast where the knives had gone in. Asha's gaze slid there and away, and then back, and rested. You died, she said, not a question. Once, something laid a cold hand on you, and a warm one, fetched you by the scruff, and told you to stand up again. And you did because you have that manner of a man who stands when told, but not about everything. Only the right things. And sure. Yes, Jon said. The word landed in the tent and did not leave. Something like that. You're no good at lying, Asha said. You're not bad at not telling, but you're no good at lying. It isn't a skill I meant to need, Jon said. He looked down at his hands. The knuckles were split in a way that meant fists had found something besides air. It makes men easy to kill, lying. There are times. I know there are times. I just haven't learned when to put my hand on the weight and pick it up. Good, Asha said. You've married a liar when she needs to be. It evens the boat. She reached, then didn't. She let her hand fall to her own knee. I meant what I said by the water. I don't love gently. I don't know if I can. I'll learn. Teach me to be kind, and I'll teach you when to cut. And between us we'll make something worth envying. Then, he smiled then, small and tired and sudden. A light that warmed a very small room and made it a place a man could sleep. I don't want men to envy me, he said. I want them to trust me. Trust and envy are cousins, Asha said. They borrow flour from the same cupboard. We'll keep them both poor. In the night the wind turned. Men awake know it, and men asleep go on being asleep. The world turns under them anyway. The horn sounded twice at the darkest hour, and men who knew the difference between practice and warning woke in one motion that made their hands find whatever they slept beside. It wasn't the dead this time. It was a rider with a white harbor pinned to his chest with a bit of bone as big as a man's palm. From White Harbor, he said, less out of breath than out of blood. A ship from the south. Fish. Strange fish. Gray men on the decks with eyes like stones. One of the Harlaw banner captains came into Manderley water and called out with a horn tuned to call krakens, not men. Men at show. Asha's head came up like a hound's. Harlaw, she said sharply. Which? The reader's nephew, the rider managed. fumbling the name as men not born to the sea fumble the houses that build on rocks. Sigfri. Sigrun? The reader is Roderick Harlaw, Asha said to John, quick and low, as if cutting a rope before a wave could take both of them. My mother's kin. He reads when other men drink. If he sent a man north into winter to find me, it's because he means to put ink where Euron puts blood. Bah. Let him in, John said at once, surprising himself with the speed of his trust. There are some names a man wants to trust, because they are like planks thrown from a dock to a drowning man. Not a boat, not a rope, but a length of dry wood in a world that has decided against it. They met the Harlaw captain on a strip of lake ice, where the edges were smeared with slush and salt, and the middle was blue-black and sure. He was a wiry man with a bookish brow and a sailor's hands, his hair tied back with a leather thong that had been knotted so many times the end had frayed into something like a tassel. He gave Asha a look that was stern and tender, and deeply relieved in the way uncles can be, when nieces do not drown in interesting ways. You've married in foolishness, he told her without preamble, his voice the same kind of dry as a book spine. Or in wisdom. I have not yet decided, and neither have you, which is what makes it proper. Asha barked a laugh. Uncle Roderick would have brought you himself if he could have been pried from a hearth, she said. But you do as well, Sigrun. Better than well, Sigrun said, only then letting the grin crack his face. He turned to John, bowed just enough, and spoke the North's language without stumbling, except on the soft places where the sea sneaks in. My lord, your grace, Reader Roderick sends this. Euron has sent a longship to the manor to toy with the Reachmen. It's nothing but sport to him, a cat with a tail in its teeth. But he gathers too much black sail on Old Wick. He sings to the men with no tongues, and they clap in time with their stumps. He smells blood in the wind and wants to know whose it is. Sigrun's mouth went grim. The reader says, tie your rope to a tree. Do not tie it to the sea. The tree is the north. The sea is madness until spring. Tell the reader we have tied to both, Asha said. He'll appreciate the paradox. He'll mutter about bad knots. Sigrun said, amused in spite of the cold, and then he'll write a song in High Valyrian about it just to annoy people who can't read it. His eyes moved to John. He also says, the day may come when the Ironborn worship a god who does not demand drowning every time someone wants a blessing. He says he is sorry not to see it himself, because he has a horrible cough. I'll send him soup, Sansa said dryly, and Sigrun, startled, realized with the small shock of men who think they know who is important in a room that the woman with the winter crown in her hair was not simply the man's sister. Lady, he said more formally. Lord Reader. Sansa said, smiling a little at the title she'd given the absent man, is invited to Winterfell if he can tolerate roasted turnips and rule. We have an abundance of both. Sigrun blinked, then bowed lower, as if she'd fetched something from him he hadn't known he could give. They sent him back with letters. Davos' hand bold and steady, Sansa's precise and clean. Asha's a scrawl like a wave's edge. Joan's narrow and blunt as a sword point. He went with 3 of Asha's men whose winter breath didn't bother them, and 2 Manderley Pullmen who could read ice like a cheap liar reads a mark. The sledges went again. The trenches ate oil and gave back heat. The dead pressed and were thrown back and came again. 2 days into that work, Theon came riding out of a curtain of trees with 4 children across 2 horses, and an old woman walking behind, hand on a rope tied to the saddle's ring. And a Glover man saw Theon, and saw the rope, and saw the old woman, and his love for his dead brother rose up inside him like a frog in boiling. With his fist, Theon didn't block. He went down, his face astonished and then not, and the old woman with the rope said, "You fool," to the Glover man with such weary contempt that the man stopped and the children stopped and the horses stopped, and even the trees thought about their choices. "He was bringing me," she said. "If you'd like to carry me yourself you can, but you'll find your back less interesting than his is." The Glover man stood there with his fists clenched and his eyes wet, and no articulate words. He made a soup of syllables and swallowed them, and then offered his hand to Theon. Theon got up without taking it. He spat blood into the snow so red it made the day look bluer, then bent and lifted the smallest child and put him in the Glover man's arms. "There," Theon said, and his split lip made the word look like it had been born breached. "Carry him." The man did. He didn't look at Theon again. He didn't need to. The round had been fought, and the score kept where men keep such things, in the quiet. Jon slept in snatches. In one of them he dreamed of the heart tree's face. It looked amused, as it always does, and then it didn't. Its red eyes widened as if seeing something behind him, and Jon turned and woke with his hand on Longclaw's hilt and ghost, pressing him to his feet with a low that a mother makes when a child is getting too close to the edge of a cliff. He went out into the just before dawn, where the cold is a thought in the head, before it is a bite in the skin. He walked without meaning to the edge of the trees where the camp's last glow fell away like spilled milk into chalk dark. And there, in the break between two pines, he saw another watching. It did not come forward. It was not the same as the one he had broken. He knew that the way a man knows a different storm by the smell. This one stood and let him look at it. The distance between them was that precise distance that makes a man feel both naked and invincible. Ghost's hackles flowed up his back like a stream climbing a bank. His lips peeled. The sound he made was too low to be a growl and too old to be a dog's. The other cocked its head, the way a bird does when wondering about a breadcrumb that might be a trap. Jon lifted his sword because that is what a man does when the thing that kills men looks at him. He didn't move forward. Men run and then freeze. Sometimes they learn to stop in the middle where life is. He stood with the sword out, and the breath going from his mouth in white little prayers. The other did not move either. It let the world do the moving. A stray flake of snow drifting down between them. A shift in the fire's branch that ticked frost against frost. The slow brightening of the eastern sky, as if a god were drawing a thin knife's edge under the hem of night, to lift it. It turned away. That was worse than anything it could have done. It turned and went back into the trees with that relaxed, unworrying step that men hate in enemies. Jon stayed where he was and counted, not numbers, heartbeats. He counted 30 before he could lower the sword. Ghost stood with him for another 30, because the wolf's prudence is older and less interested in the habits of heroes. When he came back to the fires, Asha was up, quite awake, sitting with her back to a cartwheel and her legs stretched out in that dark men think only belongs to men. She looked at him and saw too much. "You saw one," she said. "Yes," Jon said, "with no men screaming and no luck at your hand." She said, "Good. It's better when you see your enemy without your own noise in your head. I hate that they look at me as if I were a question they already solved," Jon said. His voice surprised him with its hunger. "I hate the calm." Asha shrugged a little. "We're alive. The sea looks at me that way, and I go out on it anyway." He sat. He let the silence be. He was learning to love the silences between them. They were not empty. They were storage. By evening, the dead had probed the middle line twice and found it badly behaved. Twice they fell on it with their persistence, and twice they tripped on the nets Lyanna had ordered strung low, on rope the Ironborn had provided, and the Northerners had trusted with their weight. The humility of that trust had not been obvious to anyone, and then it was, like the way a woman's hair can fall out of its tie at the end of a day and make a man feel his stomach become a warmer place. By full dark, the first of Manderley's skiffs came sleighing in with their poles and their fat laughing crews, and the men on them made rude jokes, and the women on shore took them as payment and as insult both, which is how the North keeps itself honest. In one of those skiffs came something Jon had not asked for and wanted as soon as he saw it. Barrels of lamp oil and a crate of old whalebone harpoons with iron heads. "You can fix a head to a pole by candlelight with your toes," the Manderley foreman said blithely. "Done it drunk. Don't recommend it." He clapped Jon's shoulder, saw Ghost, and had the good sense not to clap the wolves. They set men to lash harpoon heads to poles and women to cut cloth into long tongues to be dipped in the oil, and tied every man's fourth arrow, a tongue of dirty light. Sansa wrote down who took what with a clarity that would have embarrassed a coin counter, She sent a boy chasing a man for stealing a second harpoon, and when he said he hadn't, she lifted her chin and said, "Show me your hands then," and he did, and they were clean, and she apologized and handed him the second with a nerve that made him stand taller and go to the trench and put it to use. Asha brought in a second village, then a third, and in the third a woman refused to leave her hearth. And Asha said, "Bring the hearth," as if it were the most obvious thing, and her men lifted the stones from the top of it and put them on a sledge so hot they squealed in the snow. And the woman climbed onto the sledge and said, with grudging admiration, "You're a fool." And Asha said, "Will you tell me again in spring?" And at dawn of the third day, a child was lost. Not lost in the way men mean when a child wanders in the woods and comes home with a pocket full of mushrooms and a lip full of lies. Lost in the way the dead make men lose things. The little column of sledges had crossed a creek bed that wasn't a creek anymore and turned down into a swale, and the last sledge came out without the boy that had been on it 10 breaths before. If the dead had taken him, there would have been a mark, a sound, a thread that led out into the cold that the heart fears to follow. There wasn't. He was gone because winter steals as smooth as thieves. The cry went up, and Asha flinched like a blow had found her shoulder, then turned that pain into orders. "Stop. Stop. You. Rope here, you." Back to the swale with poles. Ghost. She didn't call the wolf. She said his name as if it were a title, and he looked and came and set his nose down into the churned snow and breathed. Once, twice, and then the white head swung, and he started off down a curve of earth that men couldn't see until you'd walked it. A fold in the land's old dry linen. John went after him. So did Theon. The rope ran out from a cleat on the boat runner, and his hand closed on it without any thought. He liked the feel of rope in his palm now. It told the truth in a way words seldom do. They went at a careful pace that felt wrong in the blood and right in the bones. They crested a little ridge and dropped into a bowl, and there, under a clump of brush that had been a warm brown shape, when the world had color and now was only a sketch, was the boy. He was alive because some boys are written that way by the gods. They spend their lives reminding parents of it. He had rolled and slid and stopped with his feet tangled in roots, and his scarf jammed in his mouth, and frozen a little there where his breath had wet it. He looked up at John with the calm that very scared children sometimes have, which is the calm of men who have yet to learn all the names for fear. "I went left," he said, in the reasonable tone of the recently unreasonable. "I see," John said, and lifted him with one hand, and with the other cut the scarf from his mouth with his knife. Theon stood a little behind, as if waiting to be permitted to be helpful, and John jerked his chin, and Theon stepped down and wrapped the boy into his own cloak with a speed that made the boy's eyes widen. "Warm now," Theon said, almost brusque. "Don't argue." The boy didn't. He put his head against Theon's chest, as if the matter of where heads go when the world is cold had been resolved 3 centuries ago, and Theon was simply the current bearer of the law. They got him back to the rope, and Asha's men pulled in that slow, steady way that does not tear or jerk. The boy popped out of the earth like something the sea had decided not to keep after all. His mother cried once and only once, and then thanked everyone with a fury that melted quickly into food, because that is how the North repays debts when it does not want to owe them. That afternoon, between shifting a group of old men who had armed themselves with paddles and opinions, Asha set eyes on Theon across a boat and said nothing for a long while. Finally, she dropped down beside him on the runner, their boots touching accidentally and then deliberately. "You're doing the thing you came for," she said. "Yes," he said. He touched his split lip gently with the tip of his tongue and made a little face at the taste. "It doesn't feel like much." "It never does," Asha said. "It's still the only thing worth doing." He considered that, as if turning a shell in his hand to see the colors change with the light. "Do you think the reader is right?" he asked, surprising her with the turn. "About worship. About a God who doesn't ask a man to drown to be blessed." "I think men drown for more gods than they can name," Asha said. "I think children drown most of all because they do what they're told." I think if I can make a vow in front of a tree and a bowl of salt water and have it hold, then a god who wants me underwater to hear me can go argue with the tide instead. She nudged him. Come, your face frightens people. Go frighten the dead instead. In the evening, with the wind making the sounds tents make when they would rather be houses, Sansa sat with Lyanna and a bear woman named Yara, who had a scar that bit her eyebrow into 2 short lines and rejoined again. They went over tallies. Who had been fed? Who had not? Who had blankets? Who had been clever and made a complaint, because the making of it is the only coin some people have left. Sansa wrote it all. She had grown used to turning noise into numbers. It made the world sufferable. Lady, Lyanna said bluntly, after a while, surprising Sansa any more than her bluntness usually did. What you said to Asha. About children. About banners. Do you mean to have them? Sansa paused. Charcoal lifted. This, of all questions, she did not owe a child a piece of. And yet, Lyanna was not a child in the ways that mattered. Sansa had been a child when she had been forced to answer grown women's questions with a girl's mouth and suffer for honesty. She did not understand. If the gods allow it, Sansa said. The words were formal. They opened the door to something less so. I mean to have women who make them strong. If I am not the one to bear them, I will be the one to teach them to carry their names. I will see them bullied by both worlds and taught by both. I will keep a ledger of their hurts and see every one of them repaid in herbs, in bread, in law. Nadim. Lyanna accepted this with a short nod, as if Sansa had told her the price of nails and she had brought enough coin. If you need bears, she said, you have them. Thank you. Sansa said gravely, as if she had been offered not bodies but something rarer. And she had. The dead tested the lines again and again. Each test taught them something, because the dead learn slowly, but they never forget. Sigrun's Harlaw men slid in and out of White Harbor under Wyman's gaudy noses and brought stories. Euron had danced a longship up the Mander and blown a horn that made men clutch their heads and piss themselves and laugh about it later like it hadn't hurt. He had sent a black-sailed boat to Old Town with a priest strapped to the mast like an ugly figurehead. And the priest had screamed until he drowned without water. He gathered men the way storms gather birds. Things that know better and can't help themselves. Asha listened to these stories with a stillness that men who did not know her mistook for indifference. Jon watched her watch and saw that it was not indifference. It was the careful placing of stones in a wall so that when she finally put the roof on it, would not fall under the first fat snow. When this is done, she said once, very softly, to no one in particular, perhaps to the god that loved drowning, I will chase him with a rope in my teeth if I have to. And if I hang him, I will take him down and hang him. I will take him down and hang him again, because I find the world has... Jon heard and did not remark. He had a list like that too, though the names on it had been taken by winter and knives and law and forgiveness. And forgiveness had been the hardest of those tools to use. On the 6th day, Manderley's banner came up from the south with more than food. He brought men from the neck, little tough men with reed-woven cloaks and frog-smooth faces, carrying nets with weights like iron kisses. We use these for fish, their headman said in his swamp-soft voice. And for men who think we don't see them, we can tie them thigh-high across the snow, and the dead will have to learn to dance. Do the dead dance, King. They can be made to, Jon said. Good, the man said cheerfully. We like to teach. They strung the reed nets low where the ditch had run too quickly. They hung little bells along the lines that would ring once at the lightest touch. Song the dead do not make. When the bells chimed the first time, men looked up like hounds lifting noses, and the oil went flying before anyone shouted. The idea took so fast, Jon felt a kind of humility about it, as if the world had been trying to teach him this trick, and he had been too proud to listen. That night, by lamplight, Sansa wrote more letters. Not the ones with orders. Those had flown. These she wrote to women whose husbands she had sent north, and to old men whose sons she had ordered to stand in ditches and light ropes. She wrote their names. She wrote timetables. She wrote little lies that were not lies exactly. The fire was warm. The bread soft. The children had played with a wolf's tail. She wrote them because words are food sometimes, and because absent men counted by an absent system are easier to hold on to if you can hold a piece of paper in your hand. Asha looked over her shoulder because she was a rude woman and did not apologize for it. "You think they'll love you for this?" she said, not unkindly. "I think they will live long enough to decide," Sansa said. "That will be enough for me." Asha thought about that while she sharpened her axe. "You are more dangerous than your brother," she said after a while. "He's a sword. You are a net." Sansa's mouth made a shape and then thought better of it. "Making rope is women's work," she said at last. "Yes," Asha said. "And saving men from drowning and from themselves." On the 8th day, the dead changed the tune. They came not in a patient line but in a wave, clotted deeper in one place than another, pressed by a will that had been called from further off. The other Jon had seen returned. He knew it by nothing more than hatred. He learned to hate like a craftsman, carefully, with appropriate tools. When the wave hit and found the nets and the trenches and the new tricks they had taught themselves, it hesitated and then redoubled, as if a hand had pressed down on the part of the world where the whites were numerous. A sledge turned in the crush and went over. Men fell into the lip of the ditch and were pulled not by hands but by ropes that wrapped them, because men had had the wit to tie them on. Asha cut one rope and left another and shouted to a boy whose mouth was too open for sense, and the boy shut it and set his weight where weight was wanted, which is how sense returns. The other found Jon, or Jon found him, because men seek the thing that frightens them if they have to keep others from seeing how fast their hands shake. They met again between two fires, in a place where heat licked at their ankles and cold stroked their faces with a lover's patience. Jon felt the odd calm come into him, the same one that had made men think he was brave when he was just busy enough to forget he was afraid. Longclaw remembered. The spear remembered. They kissed and quarreled, and made that thin high ringing again. Jon adjusted his grip and felt something old and wrong move inside him, and he took it and placed it on the ground like a sleeping child. He stepped and cut. The walker's armor threw flakes of light like trout in a strong current. "Not this time," the thing seemed to say, though it did not speak. This time the spear slid, and he almost lost his grip, and Ghost came sideways like a storm and sank his teeth into air where the spear had been, and felt his teeth cry out with the cold and still bit harder, because wolves do what wolves do in the presence of a thing that would unmake the world. The walker turned with a speed that made the air itself flinch and struck, and Ghost yelped, a terrible tiny sound that threw Jon forward. He stepped into the point. Seemed like stupidity written in a body, and brought the Valyrian blade down with the crash of a law passed by men who have decided to be good for a little while. The walker broke again. Snow hushed the sound as if embarrassed to have heard it. Jon dropped to one knee and put both hands in Ghost's ruff and pressed his face into the coarse pale fur. The wolf's breath was hot and smelled of meat and iron, and a clean thing Jon had not named since he was a boy. He felt the hurt where the spear had grazed. No blood, only the memory of cold. He held that too, and then stood up and looked at the line. It held. It wavered. It held. They fell back again. Not far, not in shame, only to the next place where the ground was theirs. When the fighting thinned to murder at the edges and the air stopped trying to be glass, Asha found him with soot on her cheek and snow clinging to the hair at her temple like pearls. She looked at the ditch and the sledges and the men with their hands blistered from pulling, and then at Jon with his hair stuck to his forehead and the blade in his hand, dripping not blood but a single crystal of something that was not water and not light and not anything good. "You'll break before spring," she said, "and so will I. And we'll build ourselves again with rope and law and whatever we have at hand." "Yes," Jon said. He felt so tired the word had to be lifted with both hands. "Good," Asha said. Her gaze slid past him to the pale line of the long lake, and the skiffs where poles rose and fell, and the men on them laughed like fools at their own jokes. "Tomorrow, I go back to the stony shore," she said. "We'll fetch a town that owes Glover a grudge and Mormont too. They'll hate me for it, and then they'll hate themselves less." "I'll hold here," Jon said. "We'll set new nets. The reeds from the neck will do. We'll run fire and ropes." He looked at her, at the fine lines around her eyes that were not age but weather. "Come back." "I will, if the sea doesn't drag me by the heel." She said. She reached out and touched his jaw with 2 fingers briefly. A salt blessing. "Stand," she said. "If you have to fall, fall forward." He watched her go, the black of her hair and the black of her clothes cutting the snow like script a child had finally learned to make, rough and beautiful for the roughness. He turned back to the line. Ghost padded at his side. The men were already stringing new nets between poles. Davos was getting a barrel rolled with a casual authority that makes barrels obey. Lyanna was scolding a boy for crying, then letting him cry for exactly as long as she said he could, and no longer. Manderley was counting loaves with a look of love on his face. A man gives only to bread or his grandchildren. Sansa was showing a woman how to knot a scarf so it covered the ears without slipping. The wind went around them like a cat, deciding which chair to sit on. The light went. Men ate. Men slept. A wolf dreamed of running on black sand where the water licked his toes, and then turned to stone. A king who did not think of himself as one stood with his hand on a blade that had known more names than he had. Snow fell. It did the thing it had done at the beginning of all of this. It put a clean sheet over the scars, smoothing the broken ground so that it looked as if there had never been a ditch there, never a dead, never a wedge of fire shoved into a place where the world had forgotten warmth. Morning would discover the lie. Morning always does. But for that night, under the slow drift of white, Winterfell's people, and the Ironborn, and the Neckmen, and the Wildlings, and the Manderley sailors, slept under one roof that was not a roof, and breathed the same air, and were not drowned, and were not burned, and were not burned, and belonged to each other in the way men belong when they have decided, for a time, not to abandon the living to the dead. At dawn, the bells on the reed nets chimed once, delicate as a finger on a glass. Hands reached for rope. Fire found wicks. Asha's sledges slid out like ships leaving harbor. Jon put his palm flat on Ghost's skull, and felt the little shift of ears that meant the wolf had heard something he had not. He lifted his head and listened too. It was the noise the dead make when the living teach them to dance. It was not music. It was the closest thing to it men could afford, and the best they would get until spring. And it would have to do.